What's going on, guys? Today I want to talk about a very interesting potential 2014 WCQ H.A.T format tech card that was brought up to me a little while ago, and I played around with it, and I just want to talk about my overall opinion on it. It's a card that I had known about because of some rogue strategies back in 2014 that played it, but I never really looked at it as a standalone tech card. Probably by now, if you've already clicked on this video, you know what card I am referring to, but for anyone who still doesn't know, it is Gorgonic Golem. This is a very interesting card, so I'm actually really excited to talk a bit more about this card and why I think it might have some potential, and talk about which decks might be able to take advantage of it, and just overall, do I think this is a good option in those decks. So if you've never seen this card before, Gorgonic Golem is a dark level 3 rock monster, 1200 attack, 600 defense, and its effect is, if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, the attack of the monster that destroyed it becomes 0. You can banish this card from your graveyard, target one spell or trap card your opponent controls. That target cannot be activated this turn, and your opponent cannot activate the targeted card in response to this card's activation. So, very interesting card. And so the first thing I thought with this card is, one, how am I going to get this into graveyard? Just generically easy, and which decks can actually take advantage of this? So my first thought was, obviously Madolche can send this to graveyard, but is it worth sending this when there's cards such as MST and different back row removal cards that will just eliminate the threat rather than just kind of icing it? Right away, this card kind of reminded me of a graveyard version of Soul of Silver Mountain, the Xyz that basically does the same target a back row effect, and while it's face up on the field, your opponent can't activate it, and they can't activate it in response to that card's activation. Now, obviously, this card doesn't require the commitment of 2 level 3s to make, and also, obviously, this has to be in graveyard, so it's not gonna matter if, this monster's on the field. So that was my first thought. It's interesting because a card in the main deck versus a card in the extra deck is definitely a very big difference. Having access to a card that requires basically no bricks in the extra deck is extremely good, while this has to be in the main deck. So my thought was, what decks can take advantage of this? And so decks that play, like I said, Madolche is a good option, but then there were also decks like the Twilight deck that plays Armageddon Knight, Grepher, and just a handful of things that can dump a dark monster. And when I thought Twilight, my next thought was, wait a second, Lightsworn. And the interesting thing with this card for Lightsworn is it kind of has a place in it. And so I started testing it, and it was surprisingly kind of decent. So what I mean by that is, obviously, Lightsworn is a deck that wants to mill a lot of cards to graveyard. Specifically because we're talking H.A.T format, I'm talking about Lightsworn Ruler. So again, the deck just wants to mill a lot of cards. And that deck plays a card called Necrogardener, which many of you guys are probably very aware of. You're able to banish it to basically negate the next attack of a monster. And so a lot of decks were originally playing 3 of it, but many of them started cutting down to just 2 of it, and in some cases playing 1 of it. Now, what Lightsworn can't do that well is playing back row removal besides their obvious monsters like Lila or JD to just simply blow up the whole board. So it was kind of interesting that this is a monster, and specifically a level 3, because Lightsworn Ruler also has Lumina, and Lumina is the perfect bridge for this card. One, because it's a level 3, meaning you can use stuff like the Gorgonic Golem plus the Lumina to make rank 3s, but you also have the option to be able to discard this from hand if you happen to draw it before sending it to graveyard with one of your Lightsworn monster's effects, or Needlebug Nest or something, and that way it goes into graveyard. Also, unlike a lot of cards with similar type effects, you can activate this the same turn it's sent to graveyard, which is very nice. So in a slower, underdeveloped part of the game, or just more of a late game, this card definitely becomes better. But again, even early game, it is very interesting, especially if your opponent only sets 1 or 2 back row. Take, for example, a lot of decks will, set just 1 back row. So like Dragon Rulers, a lot of times they'll either set a bluff or they'll set like a skill drain or something. And so if you're able to even just foolish this card, or say you go Charge of the Light Brigade, they're not going to flip a skill drain right away, and then you just go and right after searching, if they have no response, you banish it, target the back row, and now they can't activate it, and they can't activate it in response to this card, which is very interesting. The other thing, being dark gives the deck a little more chaos potential, or in general, decks that need more dark targets for the whole chaos thing. For example, Twilight, how I mentioned before, it's a very cool card to have an additional dark that also gives you the option of having a monster or some form of targeted back row protection in a sense, since, you'll be protected from that one specific back row. So the other cool thing, again, how I mentioned it being level 3, means you can make Leviair and stuff, for example, with 2 Luminas or just a level 3 plus a Lumina or something, and this card banishes for that effect. So you have the chance to make Leviair to bring it back, and then when it goes to graveyard, you can use it again because there is no once per turn restriction on this card. And so I thought that was actually kind of unique. Again, it's not the craziest card, but I could definitely see in Lightsworn Ruler specifically dropping 1 Necrogardna to play a copy of this, because if you're going to see Necrogardna, it's kind of a brick anyways, so you might as well have a little diversity in your bricks. The other cool thing, I guess, to note in Lightsworn Ruler specifically is the fact that this has the effect that when it dies by battle, it makes the opponent's monster's attack 0. First off, that's a permanent switch. To switch it to 0 attack, it's not till the end phase or anything. And the other thing is, in some situations where your opponent might have just a big body on board, that could be a handful of different things. Say they have their own Dragon Ruler on board. You could summon this, crash it into it, make its attack 0, and Lightsworn Ruler is known for having really big, strong monsters, whether that be the Rulers, Light Ray Diablosis, or Diablos, whatever it's called, Judgment Dragon. So even that, being able to just crash into a monster for a lot of damage, and then, maybe main phase 2 banish this, and then find an out to their back row, it's just kind of a little extra bonus. Again, you might not see this as the best card, and I don't think it's the best card, but I think it definitely plays a unique role, and it's a card worth testing. I was also kind of testing with this in a Synchro deck that plays Quick Draw Synchron. One, because, you can discard it with Quick Draw, freeze a back row and then do whatever, but also just because level 3s in Synchro decks are very important. The rock typing isn't really the most relevant, though I will say that, again, there is a deck, kind of a rogue strategy that does play rocks and stuff that I plan to profile in the future, and this card is obviously played in that for several different reasons. And I guess one other thing to note is decks that play Instant Fusion with a 3 and a 4 target can kind of use this too, because worst case scenario, you summon this, activate Instant Fusion, summon out the 3, and can make a rank 3. So if you make, like, say, an Alucard, you would Alucard attempt to pop a back row, that might force out a back row, and then when this is in graveyard, you can then kind of force a second back row. So that can be kind of interesting too, but I want to know what you guys think about this card. Just keep in mind what I said. I'm not saying it's the craziest thing. I'm not saying that it's a bad card. I think it's an interesting card, and I think it definitely needs more exploring. Just from, again, my experience, I think Lightsworn Ruler might be the best deck to take advantage of it, or Twilight, but I'm still testing around, and I appreciate you guys for recommending me to talk about this card. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, comment any questions you have, subscribe subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out, share this video with your friends, and let me know what videos you want to see next or cards you want me to discuss. And anyways, guys, I will see you in the next video.